Good morning. My name is Keats Meyer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Madison Square Park Conservancy. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning with Madison Square Park neighbors Fairfax Dorn, Bill Ehrlich, and Florence Lynch as they discuss the future of the art world. Madison Square Park has remained open through the pandemic to provide an outdoor oasis for respite and relaxation, and for those who have been isolated and sheltering indoors. We have seen extensive use of the lawns by our neighbors, workers, and families. They're all in the park, as are protesters. New York City holds a long history of being a public space for people to gather, protest, and fight for change. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to mention. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please type it into the chat function. There'll be a Q&A later on in the program, and your questions will be answered then. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Sarah Stein-Sapir, Chair of the Madison Square Park Art Council.
Thank you, Keats. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Stein-Sapir, Chair of the Madison Square Park Art Council. Thank you all for joining us for today's conversation about the future of the art world and the impact of the pandemic and protests on contemporary art. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to our Madison Square Park neighbors and panelists joining today's discussion: Fairfax Dorn, Bill Ehrlich, and Florence Lynch, and our moderator, the esteemed Brooke Kamen-Rappaport. Fairfax Dorn is the co-founder and artistic director of Ballroom Marfa, a nonprofit cultural art space dedicated to exploring varied perspectives and issues through visual art, film, music, and performance. Along with Ballroom Marfa's Board of Trustees, she oversees the overall creative vision of the organization. In addition to Ballroom Marfa, Dorn is the founder of Fairfax Dorn Projects, a design collective synthesizing art and interiors, as well as a board member of the Judd Foundation and the Whitney Museum of Art. Bill Ehrlich is a distinguished collector of contemporary and decorative art and holds a degree in architecture from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. He joined the architecture firm of Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill prior to founding his own practice that led to a career in real estate design and development. Bill produces innovative jewelry inspired by his lifelong collecting interests and is the vice president of the Friends of the Israel Museum. Florence Lynch is a New York-based art dealer and former director of sales and public relations at Elizabeth D in New York. She co-owned Lynch Tam, a contemporary art gallery formerly on the Lower East Side, and is also the founder of Florence Lynch Gallery. She's an adjunct professor at Columbia University's Teachers College, where she teaches principles and practices in the visual arts, and at FIT's School of Graduate Studies, where she teaches about the art market. Our moderator today is Brooke Kamen-Rappaport, Deputy Director and Martin Friedman Chief Curator of the Madison Square Park Conservancy. She was Commissioner and Curator of the U.S. Pavilion at the 2019 Venice Biennale with the exhibition Martin Puryear, Liberté, Libertad. Brooke?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Keats. Hello to Fairfax and Bill and Florence. Bill, if you can put on, there you go. Perfect. Now we can see you. Okay. It is great to be with you all and to take in the presence of everyone who's participating and attending today. This is a cataclysmic period that we are living in, a period that will define a generation. The pandemic has wrought havoc in our city and the country and the world. The presidential election is less than 2 months away. People are without work, without food, without economic livelihoods. The Black Lives Matter movement has galvanized voices and action for change and has brought a profound reckoning. Fires raging in California, Oregon, and Washington state are the manifestation of climate change. And art world nonprofits are connected to most of these issues culturally, politically, socially, and economically by the confirmation that institutions are not neutral spaces. The 2020 Art Basel and UBS Global Art Market Report released last week stated that galleries have been hard hit in sales volume. This has led to staff furloughs and layoffs at galleries of all sizes. Museums in New York have started to reopen at a state mandated 25% capacity, and museums across the country are facing limitations and safety measures. Art fairs around the world have been canceled and postponed, with opportunities to sell work online. The LaPlaca Cohen study, which I know Florence is going to discuss shortly, that was called Culture and the Community in a Time of Crisis. It was issued last spring, and it reveals that there's a mandate for arts and cultural organizations to become active participants in communities. There are social media accounts like Cancel Art Galleries, Change the Museum, and For the Culture that call out some of the issues facing the field today. But art and imagination can advance and overcome these circumstances because work can thrive when it's pushed and prodded to the edge. For decades to come, artists will be convening around and appraising this epic, upended time. Madison Square Park Conservancy, as Keats mentioned, has remained open to park goers with the mission that public space in New York City is essential for individuals. We work with an abiding faith that public art can impact people and communities. We've been hosting public conversations to consider this period, the role of public art and the art world on people's lives and their work and their thinking. As neighbors of the park and frequent park goers, and as three individuals who are deeply involved in the field, we're grateful today to Fairfax and Bill and Florence for sharing ideas on how each of you anticipate what the future will look like in the art world. By way of starting our conversation, I've asked our speakers to discuss several objects or images or events that they think point to the way of imagining the future. And Fairfax, we're going to start with you. And Jill, please show our slides.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. And I want to thank the Madison Square Park for bringing us all together. And I think the programming you all are doing at the park and with public art is essential to all of our lives, and especially those who live around the park and walk through it. So, right, during obviously COVID and Black Lives Matter that came up, we had to react. We had to do something. We were closed. We couldn't be open. And then with the June 13th came up, we wanted to celebrate and recognize the Black Lives Matter and mourning for all the abuse and everything that, that everyone's been going through and dealing with the abuse of power. And our artists who have been in residence at Ballroom Marfa decided to, put up this very powerful balloon. We couldn't really stake. We could do only so much of this Marfa, Texas. And so we displayed this statement in the middle of West Texas, which I think we displayed this also on the Pitchfork and then went around the world. But it was our way of having a voice. I think it's really important to give artists, the great thing about Ballroom Marfa, we give artists an opportunity to express themselves in a very sort of responsive way that because we're nimble in that sense and being out in West Texas. So this, hold on, I'm just going to pull this up really quickly. This was, yeah, there you go. And that is the artist, Roberto Lange and Kristen Sword did this piece, your musician. And this was just our way of expressing and saying our voice with our, with everything that's going on with Black Lives Matter. I guess we can go on to the next slide. And this was a collaboration that we did with Performance Space here in New York City with Rafa Esperanza. And this piece called Bust. And it was a performance and it was like a protest in front of the White House. But I think this is also shows an example of the future in terms of how critical it is that we find ways of collaborating. We teamed up with Performance Space, and Rafa had this brilliant idea of, he put himself inside of this column and he chiseled his way out. This is all about showing the antiquation of American power, what has happened in the past and how we look to the future. It was, symbolizing iconic columns and then how we think about the U.S. Capitol. And so this work progressed in two parts, from the artist, like in a place of isolation and then confinement in one of the community and of support. And this was a very powerful public action piece that we were very proud of in collaborating with Performance Space. But I think as we look to the future, especially for Ballroom Marfa, collaboration with other spaces, other institutions, only makes your voice and the artist's voice and vision more powerful. And is essential, I think, in how we think about the future in many ways. And this was, yeah. And then, so we care, and then the next slide. Oh, then here's some more. And then, this was an interesting project. We also, we had to apply for this piece to happen near the White House, and, cops were surrounding it and the people were being very skeptical, like very anxious, but it wasn't stopped, and they let us they let Rafa Esperanza do his performance. And I think it was a very powerful statement. And this is the project that we're working on now called Unflagging, and in response to many things that are happening now, one being that we are not able to be open to the public. And therefore we have our courtyard, as you saw on the Black Lives Matter slide. And this, we decided to think about flags. It was also inspired by the decision for Mississippi to change his own flag and what it means and symbolism. And we decided to invite artists to think about flags and their meaning. And flags are very powerful in terms of, symbolism and content and history. And so we, thought this would be a great way to not only to work with about 10 artists and have them displayed about 2 weeks at a time, and think about what they mean and what they represent anymore, if they represent anything. And so it's also our way of dealing with our having to be closed, and also engaging the community in this broad sense. And so this is I think it'll be a very powerful exhibition. And we're also finding it important to we work with artists, we commission artists, we pay artists, and artists are they need the work, they need to be engaged. Oh, and this is another great project that also I think has a lot to do with the future. And this is Haroon Mirza, a piece that we commissioned we started working on it 5 years ago, but it opened about 2 years ago. And it's an outdoor project that it's like a monolith, like Stonehenge, that gets activated when the moon rises, and then there is a composition of music and lights, and the viewer experiences this sort of activation, this performance piece out in the landscape and between people, and it engages people within the landscape of West Texas and the stars, and you have this experience one-on-one with the rocks surrounding you. And it's a very powerful piece. And again, this is an ongoing project. It's hopefully we'll be able to keep it up for some time. And we're all about supporting the artists as well. So the artists, when we have to show privately, gets paid separately. But, this was, about engaging the viewer with art and nature directly. The engagement is far and in between. And I know the parks that live in New York, like Madison Square Park, it does exactly that, engaging art and the viewer within nature. But it helps you. I mean, one cannot help but think about the environment and what it means and how precious it is and how fragile it is, but yet how resilient it could be at the same time. So commissioning work has been a big part of how we organize our programming and how we think about working with artists. And because they are so much about our future and they are so critical in the way we think about the way we see things, the way we see the world. And they are in so many ways essential workers. And everyone needs work. Everyone needs work. And we believe in that. And we believe that they need to be supported as essential workers as well.
Fairfax, thank you so much for sharing those images and your ideas and the work at Ballroom Marfa. It's so significant and essential right now. So thank you. Bill, please.
Well, you put an image up, which is premature. I mean, I wanted to talk in general first before we were more specific.
Okay, please do.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you profusely to Madison Square Park for their engagement and dedication to public art and to engaging the community in the broadest sense with wonderful major installations that have enlivened the park. I've lived right off the park for many, many years, and it had years of sorry state. It was in disrepair, and it was just not what it should be as a public place. And thankfully, a group of concerned citizens, I think, spurred some interest in rehabilitating the park, and it spawned the Conservancy, which then actively and aggressively pursued the arts as well. So between its mission as a park and as a place of refuge, as a botanical beauty and embracing the arts, it's really become a major player in New York City. And I commend everybody for their participation and thank you as a grateful neighbor. I think that we're in a very strange time right now. As Brooke said before, we've got an amazing number of issues that have all converged at the same time. And these have impacted us in every area of our lives. But if we just look at the kind of art community and how it is impacting the cultural world, you all know how serious it is. I think that by and large, most galleries have furloughed or laid off at least 1/3 of their staff. I think sales are down maybe 40% in general. I think that, the whole economy, the impact both financially and emotionally has taken its toll. God knows when this will return to normal, hopefully soon. Hopefully there'll be a vaccine, and hopefully we'll kind of become normal again, or as we once were normal. But I think that it's one of the things that's happened is that there's going to be a reappraisal on the part of both artists and cultural institutions and kind of collectors and the art public to rethink issues about art and its role in society. I think that there's going to be changes in arts education in many ways. We are seeing a huge number of young people going to art school or getting degrees in art history and such. And I think that a somewhat recent study showed that of the over 2 million people that graduated with a fine arts degree, only 10% of those people earn their living in the arts as working artists. So the pressure on education is going to be great. I think it's going to be more and more difficult for young artists to get seen for the moment, although it's a funny opportunity at the same time for younger artists to have more exposure and more demand, because I think economic pressures are going to be such that more affordable art is going to be obviously in greater demand than many of the higher price things that are out there. I think that art is ever more important to us now because we are much more home oriented. We are homebound in certain ways. People don't go out the same way they used to. And we realize the value of our domestic setting. As a result, we want to improve it. We want to enliven it. We want to keep it sort of nourishing us. As my wife said, that art is the comfort food for the soul. So I agree with her. I think that it gives us a kind of sustenance which is intangible. We can't get fat from it, so that's good. But it's something that sustains us in many ways. And I think as a result, people are going to want to acquire art and have it in their homes even more actively in a funny way than they did before. So it's sort of a two-edged sword here. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see how this whole equation balances out in the end. In the meantime, everybody is sort of scratching their head, not understanding, which way it's going and what's going to happen next. And we're in a state of turmoil in so many different ways. Art for us, for me, for my family, I think has been a very sustaining and fulfilling aspect of our world because we live with it and we think about it a lot and we engage in it in many different ways. It's funny because I've always had this sort of lifelong rule that I would never buy anything without seeing it, physically seeing it, because to me, actually being with the work and contemplating it in the flesh was the ultimate test, at least to initiate an understanding and a feeling for it. But given the fact that we are sequestered, so many of us, like Ruth and I, are up in the country and we've been here for 6 months, and it is like going cold turkey. We haven't been in a museum or a gallery in 6 months. I mean, that's like unheard of in our world. So you have to change some of these lifelong rules. And we've been besieged in a way because galleries and museums have realized the importance of the connectivity of keeping their audience engaged and the importance of showing work new and old and stimulating ideas and Zoom meetings and studio visits and all sorts of things. So we have been we've been reoriented from being in a physical world where we can look at the work in the flesh to a virtual world. Hence, my lifelong rule of not buying anything sort of sight unseen, from not buying from a JPEG or a photo or a slide or whatever form it would come in, has been abandoned, because the more powerful instinct in me is to continue to acquire work. If there are things that I see that are exciting and stimulating, it's very hard for me to pass it by and say, oh, I'm going to wait, until I can physically go into the gallery or wherever to see the work. So what I brought today to you are 3 different images. And I'll talk about 2 paintings or works that we just acquired within the last few weeks. One of them is up on the screen. As you can see, it's a painting by an artist named Eleanor Swarty. She has a show up actually right now, and we bought this piece from the show at Moskowitz Bays in LA. We are in upstate New York, very far from LA. But happily, the gallery showed us the work and we loved it. We thought that it was very exciting. We thought about it, and ultimately we bought this piece. It's called Wishing. And I think what's interesting about it is that it is playing with perspectives. It's playing with a narrative. It is, I think, exciting use of color, of texture, of pattern. And it is something that is pointing to a direction that has been unleashed, I think, in contemporary art now for a while. I don't know exactly when to date it, but I think it has been a certain amount of freedom that the computer has given to the rethinking of forms. And it is a kind of extension for me of surrealism. So it is taking through a younger generation's eyes the thoughts, the traditions, and the impulse of creating a narrative with this kind of fantasy. And I think that this piece in particular is important at this moment because we're all wishing for something. I don't want to go through my list of the wishes. You probably can guess what most of them are, but I think that it's symbolic of so much. I'm jumping now to the other work that I wanted to talk to you about, which is kind of the polar opposite of the Eleanor Swarty work. It's by Anthony Miserendorino. It is a complex work in that it is very, very technically executed. It is 3-dimensional, but it's in relief. and it's done by a series of different methods in order to construct the imagery. Again, it's a rather narrative piece, but in a funny way, it's very opposite of the Swarty. It's much more literal. For me, it really sort of connects to an artist that we care a lot about and have several works of, it's George Siegel. But taking Siegel in a completely different direction in a way. This piece is also different from the Swarty in that it really depends on external light. It needs the light to create the shadow that physically defines the forms within this piece, as opposed to the light that is within the painting, the Swarty painting. So it really is coming at a pictorial point in a very different mechanical sense. I think it's an extremely exciting piece and really quite brilliant because it's quite large. It's 20 feet wide. And it's constructed in a very labor-intensive way where all these objects are actually coated in paint, some form of that stiffens the surface, and then it is ultimately cast, actually, so that a rubber mold is made, and from that mold, the piece can be cast with a fabric lining it so that it strengthens and stiffens it. So this acrylic surface that's initially built up is just the conduit for the interpretation of the work. What's interesting to me about the piece is that if you can see in the center panel, there's a figure, and the figure is not rendered the same way in detail and in reality as the vegetables and fruits, so that it becomes very enigmatic, and there is a kind of mysterious quality about it, which again has a kind of narrative and almost surreal sense. So
Bill, I'm gonna jump in because I want to get to Florence before we ask you 3 questions. Let's stop here with your slides. And I also want to say thank you for describing how works of art sustain you and your family. And I think so many of us in this period. Let's go on to Florence, Florence?
Hi, I'm here.
Hi. Okay, great.
I want to say hello to everyone, and of course, thank you for this platform. Thank you to the Conservancy. So we're going to jump right in. The first thing that we're looking at is when Brooke asked me to consider 3 items, 3 things that that I wanted to talk about that was dealing with the current pandemic as well as looking into the future. I thought about things that I have read, and one of them, as you see here, is this headline: "Undeterred by the pandemic and political tumult, Western galleries expand to Greater China." That caught my eyes immediately because it speaks to the pandemic, obviously, but also in spite of political unrest in China and Hong Kong, and between the US and China, we see that growth is continuing. And this is something that's happening in the pandemic. So the future of the art world in China is absolutely continuing and emerging. And I do foresee that this will be something that will be going on not just in China, but just in terms of growth in new markets as well. And of course, as we've been seeing the growth from the last 6 years, and that's really going back to the additions of the Art Basel Hong Kong, as well as the handful of galleries that opened in China in the early 2000s to now. So it's a growth that will be continuing. Can we go to the next slide? So this one addresses, for fine art shippers, the path forward is both fraught and filled with potentials. And I really wanted us to consider this one in particular as well, because we're looking at what is happening. We talk a lot about what's happening with the galleries, we talk about the institutions, but I think it's really important that we consider logistics and what our other neighbors are dealing with, what other departments are dealing with, other industries that service the art world. So logistics, they are incredibly impacted, obviously, and they have to consider, this article in particular is an interview that was done with Paul Cannon of Atelier 4. And it's really interesting to see what they have been dealing with in terms of new protocol that has been set up because of the pandemic, and how they have to interact with their clients. And it talks also about the loss of income that the industry is dealing with. And what are they doing? What will they be doing? What will they be putting forth to make sense of it and to sort of regain revenue? And what it talks about, the potential obviously, is it talks about virtual courier as something that may be happening in the future. And it makes sense. I think it's going to be a question of seeing how that's developed. But that's part of what will be happening. And I think the other potential, of course, is the fact that the larger shipping firms and storage firms have always dealt with viewing rooms, showrooms for their clients. And now with the current situation, smaller firms are considering that as well. So there's that under consideration. And of course, with the cancellation of art fairs and museum exhibitions. So again, they are seeing a drop in shipment, and they're trying to effectively replace those revenues. And they are thinking about what will they be doing in that regard. So here we have, this is a third, again, article that really caught my eyes. And it says, what does the public want from art in a post-COVID world? So this is really looking toward the future, because we are still in a COVID world, right? So the first thing is, it says the internet is a punishing environment for arts organizations. And I don't think any of us could disagree with that. I think it's a question of why is that so? And clearly it's the fact that art organizations rely heavily on their physical assets. And when they move that online, they're really looking at fighting for visibility. So that's the first thing. How can they present their assets online? So, and the second thing is, art is not a high priority for most people right now. We can't disagree with that. I think we can absolutely all agree with this finding. And as we're slowly sort of turning back to art again, it's not a priority right now. In a post-COVID world, will it become a priority? The third thing is, it says, get clean until there's a vaccine. So they're really talking to the fact that institutions are reopening, increasing cleaning of all surfaces will bring back the public. So essentially get clean until there's a vaccine, and we don't know when that's going to happen. The fourth is, the public looks to art as an escape, even now. So what is that telling us? So again, here we're art institutions, art organizations are reimagining art spaces constantly, and sort of providing the community center service to the public. And it's essentially saying that's not what they're looking for. They are looking for an escape. They are looking for a place to relax and a place to laugh. And the fifth, which I think is really telling, it says art trails other charitable causes. So people are not giving to art organizations right now, and they do not expect, they're just not doing that. They are giving to poverty, they're giving to children causes, elderly, and religion, actually. So the study shows that human services is number one in terms of charitable giving, and religion follows pretty closely. So art organizations are trailing behind. And this is, again, something we need to address to figure out when that's going to shift.
Florence, thank you. And I appreciate how you pushed out the participants in the art world to all sectors of the field, which is important for us to understand. Let me ask, first of all, how do you think this period presents opportunities for creativity and innovation and change? We've talked about the dire aspects of this time, the cataclysmic feeling and experiences, but what about opportunities?
I think this period shows opportunities in a number of ways, and I think in a number of industries. I think it will reflect in how artists create their works. It will reflect in certainly in technology, and this is all affecting the art world, obviously. So it's not going to be only in what's created and how artists create their work and how they address it, but it's going to be pretty well-rounded in terms of what we see. Opportunities in all sectors, I believe, and not just the art world.
Fairfax, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to take a lot more generosity and imagination, especially with the museums coming, maybe collaborating more together, back, the WPA, a friend, and also who I work with, Laura Copeland, she's like, what about the WPA? That during the Great Depression, that's how the government took responsibility in putting people back to work and giving people like purpose and giving people like, they created the most amazing things. If you think about what they did, right, like to our country and with the parks and so forth, it was incredible. Incredible what they contributed. So I don't see why we can't figure out a way. And we know the government's not going to help us, likely not. But we gotta, I think, collectively have to figure out a way to, help really rebuild our community and bring back. And that's why I was saying before how artists are essential workers. Everyone in the industry, they're all essential workers in a sense, but and enriching our lives in the public and how we, like Bill was saying, how we sort of, it gives back something that we can't even describe. But I know when the Met reopened, everyone was so excited to go back. Yeah. They were really, really excited to go back and be there and be around art and history and just feel it again. And, but I think you're right with Florence's point about technology. Technology is an innovative way to really sort of explore how we can engage the art community in a bigger way and in a safe way as well. Mm-hmm. And I think, we just have the museums. I think we need to figure out another approach to engaging the artists, the communities, and making and sort of like breaking those boundaries that keep, the walls keep coming up and we have to break them down. They keep coming up, especially with this whole council culture situation that's going on.
Fairfax, do you think that it's the responsibility of the artist to respond to this period in their work?
If they want, if it feels important to them. I don't think it's not
Yeah.
for, it has to come from their heart. It has to, but they're the artists, they make their work, and it's either a part of their practice or it's not.
Yeah.
Or they've been making it all along and we're just paying attention now. We're just understanding it now, what they've been trying to say.
Yeah.
Like such as Greta Wilson, that's one example. In terms of talking about, being a Black artist, an African American artist. So, artists, they are wild thinkers, and I guess I spent my whole life. I'm an artist myself, but I've also spent my whole life supporting artists, and for that reason.
Bill, do you think that there are opportunities that the period will prompt for creativity, innovation?
Well, one of the things that I think I've always felt is that the artists themselves, in a way, is a litmus test for society. They have a way of experiencing things that help us see the world differently. And I think that the impact of what we're going through now is going to be reflected in many of their works. Not every artist will be responsive in that sort of specific way, but I think in many ways it will affect the work. It will be more sensitive and more feeling about humanity and about fragility and the precarious nature of life. So I have a feeling that we're going to see a kind of change in the work itself. And I think that will engage people because the work is usually 5 years ahead of the viewer's eye. So somehow they're going to guide us into something new, I feel.
Right. Yeah. Florence, you teach graduate students at Columbia Teachers College. How are you preparing those students for the future, and what are they paying attention to right now? And are you guiding them to participate in the field or to start something new as a collaboration with each other?
Well, students right now, graduate students in particular, they're looking for work. They're looking for work. They graduated under a very difficult situation, very hard moment, and they are in the field. First year graduate students are looking for internships that are not taking place. And second year are looking for work, and there is not a workforce. So that's obviously a problem. So I have encouraged them to look for other opportunities, to look at other different situations. If there's an interest in going into the museum world, then perhaps you want to consider a gallery position that's listed, and that's if it's even listed. And they are considering crossover fields as well. Looking at insurance, that's a major part of our field, whether you're doing for-profit or a nonprofit. Getting insurance, getting experience with an insurance firm is a good thing. So they're considering that, and just sort of looking at what they can do right now to prepare for when things get better. So that's really what I can tell them, because essentially there is no work right now. So they have to consider it. And they are looking at fashion, music, and other industries as well.
Interesting. Okay. We have some questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to read these to you. This is John Hayworth, who says there's so much excellent discussion today about collecting art and people seeking to have art in their homes since we're spending more time at home. I'd love to hear your thoughts about art with social justice practice and the role of public art at a time when the statues are coming down. How do we raise awareness of the intersection of issues that the arts address, including for wealthy collections who are often removed from day-to-day realities? So I guess to boil that down is art with social justice practice. Do you all anticipate that this will have a greater role as we go forward in time, that artists will be increasingly involved in social justice practices?
Certain artists will, yes. I mean,
Right.
it's if an artist has a voice about it, they're gonna express it. I think I think art has that power, and artists, to transcend, the class, race, politics. But I mean, ballroom art, like, this has been a part of our sort of programming for the past 18 years. It's always
Mhm.
been a concern of ours and our mission in terms of working with artists and dealing with these issues that we are faced with during these times, which are ever changing and evolving, but as part of our evolution, that is hope that we have to, like, we're still growing. We are still growing, which is evident today.
Right.
We still have a lot to learn and understand.
Yes.
I think that there's something interesting that Madison Square Park did with respect to this very issue. The Christoph Wodiczko exhibition, if you want to call it that, which was a remarkable installation in the park, addressed these issues very directly. They were about refugees. It was a powerful, powerful piece. And I think that there is opportunity to recontextualize something like the Admiral Farragut statue and
Right.
superimpose, what was it, like 12 different refugee
Exactly.
images
Yes.
with actual photographic, I mean, it was like a video projection onto the statue, telling each of these different stories and things like that, to recontextualize much of what was a given in our society, but start thinking about it in terms of current issues and problems, I think is the role of Madison Square Park and other institutions, and it will really have an impact on society.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. And we take that charge very seriously. And I think that, Christoph has been making work like that for over 50 years. So as Fairfax said, it's within the artist purview to push these questions and discussions out into.
And
into
we're the
world.
platform. We are the platform for them. That's what
Right.
that's what we do. We serve as the conduit, as the supporter, to bring forth those voices.
I think we should also be mindful that there are some artists that are very specific in creating works addressing political activism, social justice, and such. So it's not everyone who will be showing that in their work. And it's
Right.
okay. I think it's important.
I agree.
Awareness is really important. And addressing it in different ways is fine. It doesn't have to reflect in the work. But as long as you're doing your part and you are aware, and I think that's sufficient. And certainly outdoor works have played a role in that. It's improving quality of life, and it's working with the community and all of that. So on that level, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Going back into more questions. What do you think are the art institutions most in need of support right now? Museums, galleries, schools, public art programming. In addition to monetary contributions, in what other ways might people be able to support them right now? It's a great question.
They're all in need of support. They're all in need of financial support.
Yeah.
Without question.
Right.
And how can you support them? I think giving financially is the best support, quite honestly. And let them figure out how they're going to use the funds and how they can support the communities that they're in, for sure. But other ways of supporting is giving time. I think giving time to school. And these are things that can be done online, obviously. You can tutor for school. You can do community service for art institutions by working with a nursing home and all things that can be done online for now, and that can eventually transfer in person. But time and money is what institutions need.
I think also making the government aware that their support is needed now more than ever. I know there are demands on the government which are enormous for everything else under the sun. But to begin with, the United States was probably the least supportive of their cultural community of any of the Western countries. So I think that if we make our congressmen and senators aware that we want to see help and support by the government, help, financially stepping in, that could be meaningful too.
Right.
And yeah, the way they can, I mean, it's very evidence. I mean, in terms of art tourism, I mean, people, the numbers are there in terms of how much people do depend or desire to, go to museums and go to galleries and go to experience art. It's profound. It's a profound number. I think it's more than even sports teams, but it's very profound. And there should be more support given from the government than there is. Very limited support. But in terms of people, I think it's just participation, showing up, being there, and I mean, yes, giving time if you have the time, but it's also about enjoying it as much as you can.
We have one more audience question, and then I'm going to ask you all a final question. Barbara Campisi asks if you see institutions remodeling themselves to become more responsive, engaged, collaborative with other institutions, artists, and audiences.
I think that would be a powerful way forward. Is to, I mean, the more we can collaborate, the more powerful, I mean, and put, resources together. I think we could be more creative. We can have more of an impact. We can get our message across to wider audiences, more diverse audiences. And I think it would be a great thing. It's also a good thing for the people who support these institutions. I mean, it is hard to support everything, but
Right.
when as people sort of join forces, nonprofits, I think it only benefits everyone if you do it in the right way.
Baylor Florence?
Profits as well can start consolidating. A lot of galleries, I think, will be forced to consolidate.
No, I agree.
Because an economy of scale that makes a big difference. So
Right.
I think that we're going to see much more of that too.
Right.
Consultation and collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, do you think the online sector, in terms of access to new communities, new audiences, artists' work, meetings, gallery visits, art fair sales, is that here to stay? And what guidance in your worlds, what guidance do you have for using this online source effectively going forward?
Well, I think engaging with art is not a solitary event. So I think it's inevitable that what we're seeing now will get better. I think we will see an increase in all sorts of in AV, VR, MR, XR, all of that new technology that I mentioned earlier will emerge. It will get better, and it will make a difference in how we experience it in the future. But again, art fairs and social gatherings, those are best experienced in person. Auctions do exponentially better when you're in the room. So I think that certain events will go really well online, but there's no question that you're not in the room when you're viewing anything online. So the future is online. It will get better, but we are definitely getting back to being in the room for a lot of different events and art fairs and auctions
Yeah.
and so on.
I think that as Amazon goes, so goes the nation. I think that our society has changed a lot, and the impact of that change is going to be ongoing and continue in that direction. I agree that there's, with Florence, that seeing an exhibition is, of course, vital, or being in an auction room is vital compared to other experiences online. But I think that the reality of our lives
Yeah.
for the moment will
Right.
retrain us in many ways
Interesting.
to
Yeah.
accept and find comfort in the convenience
Mhm.
of seeing more online. I mean, it's pretty remarkable when you consider that, we're not able to travel the way we once were, or to really go into a museum. But if you can then take a tour through the Louvre with the curator online, I mean, that's a gift that is just fabulous. And I think people are going to avail themselves, and I think those opportunities are going to be made more available by the institutions, public
Yeah.
or private. And I think that it's going to grow in the future.
Fairfax, any insight? Not
I
on
mean,
that.
yeah, I agree with everyone. There's not, I mean, it's just,
Okay.
I think, hopefully, I think we did need some editing of art fairs. I think we all, we were all a little and maxed out in terms of everyone trying to be everywhere at the same time. And there was so much expansion and growth so fast, and so
Right.
many, and there's so much that this also is calling for a time for more discernment, for more for just a little bit more of a focused view, which I think, and choosing what is most meaningful to you, or what, instead of just trying to be everywhere and do everything. But
Right.
and I don't know if all fairs will make it. I don't know what that looks like. Or even these galas, or what that looks like, because I think many people are very happy to feel like have the obligation, and there's less obligation, which I have to say feels good
Mhm.
too at the same time.
I have so many more questions, and there are other questions in the chat, but we are over our time limit. So we're so grateful to you, Fairfax and Bill and Florence, for your insight, your thoughtful ideas for the future, and for sharing your essential thoughts this morning. And I think all of us appreciate how you're continuing to participate in the field with really great contributions through your work with artists, your work with students, at the nonprofits as a collector, and really your guidance to so many others. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you everyone in the audience for being here too. And we will see you all soon in the neighborhood, I hope, of Madison Square Park.
All right.
Stay well, everybody. Thank you.